The bank manager didn't speak at first. He just looked at me with a pale face and shaking hands, then slowly turned that black security monitor toward me. My breath caught so hard I thought my chest might crack open. There on the screen was my daughter-in-law, Beverly, standing outside Dorothy's safety deposit box room just 3 days earlier. She wore dark sunglasses and that blue coat she thinks makes her look important, smiling at the front desk like she owned the place. But that wasn't the part that made my knees go weak. The part that nearly dropped me was the man standing beside her, holding a folder in his hand, my own son Leonard. My wife Dorothy had been buried for 6 months. So why were they trying to get into her box before I even knew what was inside it? My name is Vernon Pearson, and I'm 67 years old. That was the day I learned that grief can make you tired, but betrayal can wake you up like ice water to the face. Until that moment, I thought I was just coming to the bank to collect some insurance papers Dorothy might have left behind. Maybe some old policies, maybe notes about the house, maybe one of those careful lists she always made in her neat handwriting. My wife believed in keeping records. She labeled everything, saved every receipt, every family photo, every birthday card I ever gave her in 42 years of marriage. If Dorothy put something in that safety deposit box, I figured it was important. I never imagined it could be dangerous.
The bank manager, Mr.
Peterson cleared his throat. His voice came out low and careful. Mr. Pearson, I didn't let them in. Your wife left very specific instructions. No one gets access unless you're present with proper identification after the death certificate was filed. He paused and looked at me real careful-like. But your son and his wife got pretty upset when I refused. They said you were getting confused, that they were helping manage your affairs. Confused. That word hit harder than I expected. I kept staring at that frozen image on the screen. Beverly had one hand on Leonard's arm, the way she always did when she wanted to control a room without looking controlling. She had that perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect little act she put on whenever she needed something. She called me Dad in this sweet voice that always sounded like she'd practiced it in a mirror. Leonard looked tired in that video, nervous. Smaller than I remembered, even though he's a grown man of 44. My only child, looking like a kid who got caught stealing from the cookie jar. Who was it? I asked quietly, though I could see them plain as day. Mr. Peterson looked down at his papers. It was your son and daughter-in-law. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I just pressed my hands flat against the edge of his desk so he wouldn't see them shake. Around us, the bank hummed with normal life. Someone laughed across the lobby. A phone rang somewhere. It felt wrong that the world could keep moving like that when mine had just split open. I'd still like to open the box, I said. Mr. Peterson nodded. Of course, Mr. Pearson, but before we go in, there's something else you should know. They didn't just ask once. They came back twice. That made me look up sharp. Twice? Yes, sir. He swallowed hard. The second time, your daughter-in-law brought documents she claimed gave her temporary authority over family property. Our legal department rejected them. They were incomplete, possibly altered. I heard Dorothy's voice in my head then, the same steady voice she used when she was working out a problem in the garage office. Slow down, Vernon. Look close. The truth always leaves tracks. Dorothy had said that plenty of times over our years together. Usually when something didn't add up right, or when one of Leonard's stories as a kid had holes in it. Back then, the lies were about broken toys and muddy shoes. Now apparently they were about legal papers and dead women's money. I nodded once. Take me to that box. As we walked down the quiet hallway, my work boots clicking on the polished floor, I felt like I was walking into two places at once. The bank vault ahead of me and the long tunnel of my marriage behind me. Dorothy and I weren't perfect. No marriage is, but we'd built a life together through layoffs, medical bills, car trouble, and the kind of financial stress that makes you sit at the kitchen table at midnight with your head in your hands. I'd run Pearson's Auto Repair for 40 years, started it from nothing in a rented bay, built it up bolt by bolt until I owned the whole building on Maple Street. The property was worth close to $400,000 now. Not bad for a mechanic who started with a toolbox and a dream. It wasn't fancy, but it fed us. It paid for Leonard's college, his wedding, helped him get started in his IT career. It kept the lights on and the bills paid. Dorothy managed the books, handled the customers when I was under a hood, made sure everything ran smooth. Leonard used to love that garage. As a little boy, he'd follow me around, sit on an upturned bucket, ask 100 questions while I worked. What's that wrench do, Dad? Why's that part greasy? How fast can engines go? I'd answer every single question like it mattered. A boy who asks questions, I used to tell him, won't grow up to be a fool. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Or maybe Leonard changed slowly, and I did what too many fathers do, kept making excuses because love can be blind when it wears a parent's face. Mr. Peterson opened the vault room and stepped aside. Inside were rows of little metal doors, cold and secretive. He led me to number 247 in the middle row. He put his key in, then handed me mine, the one Dorothy had made me keep in my toolbox for someday. I'd hated that word when she said it years ago. It sounded so final. Now it felt cruel. My fingers slipped trying to get the key in. "Take your time," Mr. Peterson said gently. The lock clicked. He pulled out the long metal box and set it on a table in a small private room. Then he closed the door, giving me a silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. I opened the lid. Inside wasn't what I expected. There were papers, yes, but not just insurance forms. There was a thick envelope with my name written across the front in Dorothy's careful handwriting. There was a flash drive. There was a small jewelry box. And under all of that was another envelope with red ink across the front that said, "If Leonard or Beverly try to open this without Vernon, something is very wrong." I stared at those words until they blurred. Mr. Peterson saw the red envelope and took a step back. "Would you like some privacy?" "No," I whispered. "Stay, please," because suddenly I didn't want to be alone. My hands shook as I picked up the envelope with my name. The flap came open easily. Inside was a letter. "My dearest Vernon, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm sorry for that. I know you hate when I worry about the future, but some women feel storms coming before the clouds show up. For the last 8 months, I've been seeing things that troubled me deeply about Leonard and Beverly's finances. I wanted to believe I was wrong. I prayed I was wrong. But if they rushed to this box before you, then I wasn't wrong at all." A chill crept up my spine. I kept reading. "There are things about our son's debts and Beverly's pressure on him that you don't fully know. I tried to shield you because your heart is good and because I hoped Leonard would find his backbone. But hope isn't the same as truth. Inside this box is proof of money taken, signatures copied, and plans discussed behind our backs. If I'm right, they were waiting for one of us to die so they could force you out of the garage and sell the property before you knew what hit you." My mouth went dry. Mr. Peterson made a small, worried sound, but I held up my hand and kept going. "The total debt is $180,000, Vernon. It started with a $50,000 business loan Leonard took without telling us, using our garage as collateral. When that wasn't enough, Beverly found private lenders, dangerous people who charge $80,000 in additional fees and interest that grows every month. Leonard signed papers he didn't understand, and Beverly forged documents with both our signatures." I had to stop reading for a second. $180,000, nearly half what the garage was worth, the building I'd sweated over for 40 years, used as gambling money by my own son. I also believe Leonard doesn't fully understand what Beverly has done in his name. He's guilty of weakness and lies, but I fear she's pushed him further than he realizes. Listen carefully before you act, Vernon, but do act. Don't let silence bury the truth with me. A tear hit the page. Dorothy had known. She'd known and died carrying that weight alone, trying to protect me right to the end. Even sick with cancer, even facing her own death, she'd been fighting to save what we built. I set the letter down and reached for the red envelope. Inside were copies of property records, bank statements, and printed emails. I didn't read every page right then, just enough to make the room spin around me. There were references to the garage, our garage, the building I'd sweated over for 4 decades. There were papers about transfer plans, private lending arrangements, something called a caregiving authority. My name was typed in places I'd never signed. Then I saw one sentence in a printed email that made my stomach turn. "Once Vernon gets too old to fight us, the property transfer will be simple." I knew that sentence came from Beverly before I even checked who sent it. It had her voice all over it, cold, calculating, smiling while it cut. The email was dated 2 months before Dorothy died. They'd been planning around my wife's death while she was still breathing. For one strange second, I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because sometimes shock twists into something else. Too old to fight. Beverly had made a serious miscalculation there. That was going to be her first mistake. Her second mistake was trying to get into this box before me. The flash drive probably held more evidence. The jewelry box held Dorothy's wedding ring and a small folded note. "Vernon, keep this close to your heart." The drive has everything. Bank records, phone calls I recorded, copies of forged documents. If something happens to me suddenly, don't trust quick tears or family pressure. Go to Lorraine Foster first. She knows everything. Lorraine Foster, our family lawyer from way back. Dorothy hadn't used Lorraine in years for regular business, but she trusted her more than anyone. Smart woman, Lorraine. Tougher than nails and honest as the day is long. Mr. Peterson looked worried. "Should I call someone for you?" "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded different, steadier than it had all morning. Call me a taxi, not my family, just a taxi." He nodded and stepped out. I sat alone with Dorothy's letter in my lap, and the proof of betrayal spread across that table like evidence of a crime. Part of me wanted to drive straight to Leonard's house and throw every page in his face. Part of me wanted to crawl into bed and pretend none of this was real. Instead, I did what old mechanics like me do when something breaks down completely. I took a breath, organized the parts, and figured out how to fix it properly. On the taxi ride home, I stayed quiet, watching the town roll by, the diner where Dorothy and I ate breakfast every Sunday, the pharmacy where we'd filled her cancer prescriptions, the gas station where Leonard worked one summer in high school. Every corner held a memory. Every memory now felt different. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I stood on the front porch of the house I'd bought with my first big garage profit, looked at the door Dorothy had painted yellow because it made her smile, and made myself a promise. No one was taking this house from me. No one was using my wife's death as a stepping stone over my body. Inside, the rooms were too quiet. I made coffee with steady hands and sat at the kitchen table where Dorothy used to pay the bills. I spread out 3 pages from the envelope, enough to see the truth clearly, but not enough to drown in it yet. One page showed a property transfer draft with my forged signature. One page showed the original $50,000 loan documents using the garage as collateral. One page showed Beverly's email about waiting for me to get too old to fight. I stared at them until the kitchen filled with evening shadows. Then I picked up the phone and called Lorraine Foster. She answered on the second ring, sounding like she was still at the office even though it was past 6. "Lorraine Foster speaking." "Lorraine, it's Vernon Pearson." A pause. Then her voice changed completely. "Vernon, I've been expecting your call. That caught me off guard." "You have?" "Dorothy came to see me 2 months before she died. She was very sick, but her mind was sharp as ever. She filed some documents with me, Vernon, important ones. She said if anything happened to her, and if Leonard or Beverly started moving too fast around family property, I should expect to hear from you." My chest tightened. "What kind of documents?" "A protective trust, for one thing. Dorothy moved the house and garage into a legal structure that Beverly can't touch. She also filed what we call a sealed affidavit, a sworn statement about suspected fraud, forged signatures, and financial manipulation." I closed my eyes. Even dying, Dorothy had been 3 steps ahead of them. "There's more," Lorraine continued. She gave me copies of recorded phone conversations, bank statements, and email exchanges. "She built a case, Vernon, a solid one. Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because Dorothy was very specific," she said. "Don't drown Vernon in this mess unless they force his hand. But if they try to move on the property, or if they rush the bank, then give him everything he needs to fight back." I thought about the security footage of Leonard and Beverly at the bank. They forced my hand. Then it's time you knew everything. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" "Yes." "Bring whatever you found today, and Vernon, don't let them back in your house tonight." After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt since Dorothy died. Not peace exactly, but the steady confidence that comes when you know you're not fighting alone. Dorothy was still watching my back. I was still sitting there when I heard a key slide into my front door. I froze. Leonard never knocked. I'd always told him to use the doorbell like a polite person, but he never listened. The lock turned. Beverly's voice floated in sweet and bright and wrong. "Dad, we thought you might be lonely tonight." Then Leonard stepped in behind her carrying flowers, white lilies wrapped in cellophane, the kind people bring when someone's dead and they want to look thoughtful. He looked tired, older than his 44 years, with worry lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before Dorothy died. The first thing Beverly looked at was the papers on my kitchen table. Her smile disappeared so fast it was like someone had flipped a switch. For one small second, nobody moved. Then I knew without a doubt that the real fight for my family had just walked through my front door. Beverly recovered first. She always did. "Oh," she said lightly, glancing at the papers, then back at me. "You're busy." I folded my hands in my lap. I was. Leonard cleared his throat. "Dad, we brought you flowers." "I can see that." The lilies looked too white, too perfect, too much like something you put on a grave. Dorothy would have hated them. Beverly stepped further into my kitchen like she owned it. "We were worried. You haven't been answering your phone much, and we thought maybe you shouldn't be alone tonight." There it was, hidden under the sugar, that soft little push. "You shouldn't be alone, you need help, you might not be managing well." It sounded caring if you didn't know how to listen. I looked at Leonard, thoughtful timing. His grip tightened on the flower stems. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I spent today at the bank," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Dorothy's safety deposit box." Beverly didn't blink, but I saw her neck muscles tighten. Leonard's whole face changed, not much, but enough for a father to notice the bank. He repeated, "Yeah." The safety deposit box, I tilted my head, seems like I wasn't the first one interested in it. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Beverly let out a little laugh, too quick, too practiced. Oh, Dad, that old thing. Dorothy probably just left boring paperwork in there, did she? I picked up the loan document from the table, the one showing the garage as collateral, and watched their faces. Funny, because I found something more interesting than paperwork. Leonard took a step forward. Dad, maybe we should sit down and talk about this. No, I said. That word came out harder than I meant it. Leonard stopped dead. I'd spent too many years making things easy for him, smoothing over his mistakes, cleaning up his messes. A father can ruin a grown son that way without meaning to. Beverly set her purse on my counter like she lived there. Dad, you look upset. Maybe you misunderstood something you saw? I almost smiled. She didn't even know what I'd found, but she was already preparing my confusion for me. I understood that my garage is collateral for a $50,000 loan I never authorized, I said, holding up the document. I understood that someone forged my signature on these transfer papers, and I understood that you wrote an email about waiting for me to get too old to fight you. That hit home. Leonard's head jerked up like I'd slapped him. Beverly's perfect posture went rigid. You went through our private communications? She asked, trying to sound indignant. No, I went through my dead wife's evidence folder. I set the papers down carefully, the one she put together before she died. The one that shows exactly how much trouble you two are really in. Leonard looked sick. Dad, we can explain. Good, I said. Because I'd love an explanation for why you tried to get into that box before me, and why you brought forged documents to a bank, and why the total amount you owe isn't just $50,000. It's $180,000. The number hung in the air between us like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Leonard dropped the flowers. They hit my kitchen floor with a wet thud, one lily bending sideways against the tile. Beverly's mask finally slipped completely. How could you possibly know that? Because my wife was a lot smarter than either of you gave her credit for. Leonard stared at Beverly like he was seeing her for the first time. You told me Dad was just being paranoid. You said Mom only kept records because she wanted control over everything. Beverly's voice went low and desperate. Leonard, don't do this now. No, I said, standing up slowly. Now's exactly the right time. My heart was pounding, but part of me felt calm. The kind of calm that comes when you finally stop running from the truth. Tell me about the private lenders, Beverly. Tell me about the $80,000 in additional debt. Tell me about the interest that keeps growing every month. Leonard went white as paper. $80,000. You said it was just fees. You said we could manage it. Beverly spun toward him, all pretense gone now. We could have managed it if your parents hadn't been so selfish, if they'd just helped instead of hoarding everything. Hoarding, I laughed, short and bitter. I worked 40 years to build something worth leaving to my son. That's not hoarding. That's being a father. And what good does it do Leonard if it's all tied up in trusts and wills while he drowns in debt right now? That's when I understood something Dorothy had tried to tell me in her letter. Beverly wasn't just desperate. She was dangerous. The kind of person who'd rather burn down a house than not own it. Who are these lenders? I asked. Neither of them answered, so I asked louder. Who did you borrow money from? Leonard's voice came out as a whisper. People Beverly knew. Business contacts. What kind of business contacts charge $80,000 in fees on a $50,000 loan? The kind, Beverly said coldly, who don't wait around for old men to die so their families can inherit property. That's when car doors slammed outside, heavy footsteps on my porch, then someone pounded on my front door hard enough to rattle the frame. Leonard went white as paper. Beverly's perfect composure finally cracked completely. Who's that? I asked. Neither of them answered. Then a man's voice boomed through the wood. Leonard Pearson, we know you're in there. Time's up. I looked from my son to my daughter-in-law and understood that whatever mess they'd created was now standing on my front porch, looking for payment nobody in this room could make. The pounding came again. Open this door, Pearson. We're not playing games anymore. Beverly grabbed Leonard's arm. Don't answer it. This is my house, I said. Nobody tells me what to do in my own house. I walked to the front door and opened it, keeping the chain on. Two men stood on my porch in dark coats. One was broad and red-faced with hands like hammers. The other was tall and thin with cold eyes that reminded me of a snake. You Vernon Pearson? The big one asked. I am. And you are? Roy Walsh. This is Norman Grant. We're here about a debt your son owes. Leonard doesn't live here. The thin one, Grant, smiled without any warmth. But he's inside. We saw him come in. Along with his wife. I didn't confirm or deny it. What kind of debt? The kind that's grown to $230,000 with accumulated interest and penalties, Walsh said. The kind that requires immediate attention. $230,000. It had been $180,000 in Dorothy's files. The number was growing faster than weeds. That's a lot of money, I said. Grant nodded. It is, which is why we're here to discuss asset recovery options, such as, well, we understand there's valuable property involved. A business, a house, things that could settle this matter quickly and quietly. I looked at both of them carefully. They weren't bank officers. They weren't lawyers. They were the kind of men who made money from other people's desperation. Let me save you some time, I said. My son doesn't own any property. I do, and it's not available for his debt collection. Walsh's face darkened. Mr. Pearson, maybe you don't understand the seriousness of this situation. Maybe you don't understand that this conversation is over. I started to close the door, but Grant put his foot against it. Not so fast. Your son signed papers using family property as collateral. That makes it our business. My son doesn't have the legal authority to sign anything involving my property. He did when his wife provided documentation showing Family Financial Management Authority forged documentation. The papers Beverly had tried to use at the bank. Those documents were fraudulent, I said. Both men looked surprised. Grant pulled his foot back. Fraudulent how? Walsh asked. Forged signatures. False claims of authority. The kind of fraud that gets people arrested, that hit them hard. They exchanged glances. These weren't men who wanted to be connected to legal fraud cases. We'll need to verify that, Grant said, but he was already backing away from the door. You can verify it with my lawyer, Lorraine Foster downtown, or with the police detective who'll be getting copies of all the forged documents tomorrow morning. I closed the door and locked it. Through the window, I watched them walk quickly to their car and drive away. They'd be back eventually, but now they knew this wasn't going to be the easy collection they'd expected. I turned around. Beverly was standing in my hallway with tears streaming down her face. Not sad tears. Desperate ones. You just destroyed us, she whispered. No, I said. You destroyed yourselves. I just refused to let you destroy me too. Leonard looked broken. Dad, those men, they're not going to just go away. No, they're not. But they're not my problem either. They're yours. You signed the papers, you borrowed the money, you deal with the consequences. Beverly's desperation turned to rage. You selfish old man, we're family. Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't steal property. Family doesn't plot around their father's deathbed. We never plotted around anyone's deathbed. I walked to the kitchen and came back with Dorothy's letter. My wife was dying of cancer when you sent emails about waiting for me to get too old to fight you. She was barely breathing when you started planning property transfers. If that's not plotting around a deathbed, what is? Beverly's face crumpled. For the first time, she looked exactly like what she was, a scared woman who'd gambled with other people's lives and lost. We didn't mean for it to get this bad, Leonard said quietly, but it did get this bad, and now you have to fix it yourselves. 2 days later, Lorraine Foster and I sat in her office with Detective Reynolds of the Police Financial Crimes Unit. The evidence Dorothy had left was overwhelming. Forged signatures, fraudulent documents, unauthorized use of property as collateral. Beverly was arrested that afternoon at her office. Leonard wasn't charged criminally, but the civil consequences would follow him for years. The debt collectors disappeared once they realized the property liens were fraudulent and they'd be facing legal trouble if they pursued collection. Leonard moved out of the house he couldn't afford anyway. He got a smaller apartment and a job that paid less but didn't require him to lie to anyone. It wasn't the life Beverly had wanted, but it was honest work. The garage stayed mine. The house stayed mine. Dorothy's trust protected everything she'd worked 42 years to help me build. Leonard comes by sometimes now. We work on cars together, and he asks questions like he did when he was little. He's learning to be the man his mother always hoped he could become. It's not easy for him, and it's not quick, but it's real. Sometimes I stand in the garage office where Dorothy used to do the books, and I can almost hear her voice. The truth always leaves tracks, Vernon. She was right about that. She was right about everything. The best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's just refusing to let the liars win. Family loyalty without boundaries becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destruction. A man's legacy isn't just what he builds with his hands, but whether he has the courage to protect it from those who mistake kindness for weakness.